Hello and welcome to another episode of the Permanent Culture Podcast and live stream with your host, Michael Kundick, chairperson of the Utah Permaculture Collective and an all-around hardworking advocate for the rapid yet conscious transition to the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. This is the story of the permaculture movement here on this indigenous land known as Utah and beyond, and the creative forces that are coming together to form healthy, resilient communities living in harmony with nature. We go live with our community every Monday evening, and we invite you to join us so we can take your comments and questions as the show unfolds. On behalf of our sponsors, the Utah Permaculture Collective and Salton Studios, thank you for helping us create a permanent culture in service to life. All right, thank you everybody for joining us today on the Permanent Culture podcast and live stream. Today, I'm really excited about our episode. We have a really unique set of guests with us today that are going to be talking about this effort to reduce gun violence and a really unique program that actually turns turned-in guns into garden tools. And of course, as we're all working towards this more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. The permaculture way, so many of us are involved in gardening and farming, and to think that we would be taking this act of peace and putting it towards almost like a swords to plowshares sort of situation, I thought was just a really great fit with our permanent culture. And of course, anything that allows us to move towards a more holistic and peaceful future, fantastic to have these wonderful people with us. And so Nancy with the Gun Prevention Center for Utah, I'm so grateful to have you here today, and I know you have some things you'd like to share. You prepared. Would love to hear that.
Thanks so much for inviting us to be here. I don't know if you know, but we're just wrapping up National Gun Violence Awareness Day, so this is very timely for us, and we always have love to have an opportunity to talk to people about gun violence. Utah's two biggest gun violence issues are suicide and domestic violence homicide. And in both instances, easy access to a firearm in the home during a crisis can lead to tragic loss of life. Because a family situation is dynamic and changes over time as family members age, the presence of a gun in the household may become unnecessary or even a liability. Some factors that affect that are the presence of curious children or grandchildren, the emotionally volatile teen years, emotional volatility due to strained family relationships, job loss, economic hardship, or aging. And another is guns no longer being used for hunting or sports shooting. A lot of states allow citizens to take their unwanted firearms to the police and have them safely destroyed. However, by law, Utah police are required to resell all donated guns. Many gun owners worry that these resold guns will fall into the wrong hands and cause injury or death. Rawtools is a nonprofit organization out of Colorado that offers an alternative. They take unwanted firearms and turn them into beautiful, useful garden tools. And we have one of their tools here for those of you that can see the video. They really are beautiful and useful. The Gun Violence Prevention Center invited Rawtools to Salt Lake City last fall to do a Swords to Plowshares event. And for those of you that may not be familiar, this is a biblical reference. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation. They will train for war no more. Everyone will sit under their own vine and fig tree. No one shall make them afraid. At this event, we had several guns donated by people who no longer wanted them. We had handguns and hunting rifles, and we even had an AK-47 that was donated. Rawtools safely disarmed the guns and then used a forge to beat them into garden tools like this. From donated guns, Rawtools can make mattocks, which are small handheld pickaxes like this. And they can also make garden spades, which are small hand trowels. At our event, gun violence survivors were invited to tell their story and to help beat the guns into garden tools. Currently, the Gun Violence Prevention Center of Utah is partnering with Rawtools to give Utahns with unwanted guns a safe alternative to having those guns resold. GVPC provides the disarming station that safely destroys the gun, and this is important because if you do it wrong, you create a sawed-off shotgun, and that's an illegal firearm. You can get in a lot of trouble for that. We then send the pieces to Rawtools to be transformed into garden tools or other useful objects. The garden tool that is made is free to the gun owner, or it can be donated to Rawtools to be sold to support their ongoing work. And now I want to introduce Michael Martin, who's with us from Colorado. He's the person who started Rawtools, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about their nonviolence workshops.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Thank you, Michael, for having me tonight. This has been looking forward to this, and it's been a while since we got to chat a little bit, Nancy. So Rawtools started in 2013, which would the early 2013, which would have been 3 months or just over 2 months after the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. And it's as Nancy alluded to earlier, we're a faith-based organization that takes a lot of our lead and guidance from that scripture about beating swords into plowshares. And really what we found as we've worked with victims and survivors of gun violence, sometimes they do share publicly, and we found that there's a lot more we love the tools that we make, but we also see that people are being transformed as well. It's not just the metal that gets transformed. It's the people who are listening to the stories of folks who've continually deal with the trauma of gun violence. It's the people who pick up a hammer and take a few hits at our events, and it's the people who use the tools afterwards. So we're really excited to partner with organizations like Utahns to Prevent Gun Violence and the Prevention Center and Nancy, and there's been great partners all across the country that help us with this mission and vision.
Now, did Rawtools come about before this program specifically happened, or did it kind of happen at the same time? I'd love to know a little more about your story, about how you came to be in this place with this company doing these things.
Yeah, so it was really an idea 8 or 9 years ago that we got some people together to explore what it might look like to have a modern context of swords to plowshares. Of course, there's been a lot of artists that have done from small installations to huge community installations of guns to art that is placed in community focus for people to see. And those artists really opened up the imagination and the space for an organization like Rawtools to exist. And so we formed that, and I think just as mass shootings continue to happen, and very much like Salt Lake City here in Colorado Springs, where we're based, suicide and domestic violence are some of the larger numbers, at least percentage-wise, for gun violence. So as that started to make the news more and more, my dad Fred is our lead blacksmith. We learned how to blacksmith so we could do this. And once Sandy Hook happened, we had a lot of people come around and support the vision for this, and we've grown. And Nancy reached out about 2 to 3 years ago, and we were able to partner up and have a really great event just last fall there in Salt Lake City.
That's wonderful. How many guns got turned into garden tools at this last event?
So usually at each event, we make one tool in that kind of hour to hour and a half time frame that the event happens. But There was almost, I think, 9 to 12 guns that were donated. Maybe Nancy remembers the exact number, but on average, a handgun we can make one tool out of, and a shotgun or rifle we can make up to 6 out of. So we can make 2 to 3 tools per gun that's donated.
Beautiful. I would love to hear more about your book as well, and I'd love to hear that like the mission of this program was present as you started this company. I think that's amazing. You also are an author, a co-author of Beating Guns. Tell me about how the book came about and what's going on with that.
Yeah, so my co-author Shane Claiborne, who lives in Philadelphia, um, we have been working together and partnering. He was really one of the first partners to come alongside us. He's a Christian author and activist out there in really one of the urban centers of Philadelphia in a neighborhood called Kensington. It's a really neglected area, and so he helps with affordable housing. Half a block was burned down at one point, and the city didn't care to do anything, so they started some urban gardening and have some chickens and a huge park that they turned it into, and they maintain it themselves. So there's a whole lot of kind of that harmony you speak of permaculture behind this vision that Shane has been a part of for the last 6 to 7 years. And we started doing events together, and the more and more we worked together, he's uh, an author who's written books with other folks probably 7 to 10 times before this. This is my first book. But we decided that we wanted to partner on something like this. But on top of that, we traveled for about 40 days, a little over 40 days across the country when it released in March of 2019. And we went to 37 different places, about 35 cities, and invited folks who've been affected by gun violence to share their stories. And we really wanted to help be a network for people in their community to come together. Often we find that there's a lot of 3 or 4 maybe organizations that are working at different intersections of gun violence. So there's that intersection of domestic violence and mass shootings and suicide, hate crime, gang violence, police violence. All of those intersections have different organizations working at them. And we find that a lot of our events, those organizations kind of have 1 or 2 or 10 or 12 representatives there, and they finally get to meet each other because it's really easy for us to silo ourselves and focus on very important issues. And it's really beautiful when every now and then we can kind of gather around to share our resources and ideas. And so that's what really galvanized around this event. The byline of the title is "Hope for People Who Are Weary of Violence." And I think watching that gun be turned into a garden tool really offers a moment of hope, while also at the same time witnessing the deep trauma and grief that people have to deal with for the rest of their life, and offers a glimpse even, and for some people it's more than just a glimpse of a way forward. So when we traveled around the country, it was really a great way to see so many people. And so often the people that would invite us, we'd often go to churches, but then behind the church they had a community garden there that tool was going to be used in.
It's beautiful. I love that it grounds right at the spot where people are bringing it in and cultivating the soil with that outcome. Like it really does tie together the whole process, the human, emotional, physical, soil. Thank you, Mike. And I don't know whether to ask you or ask Nancy this first, but I'm curious about what brought you into this work so passionately. And maybe I'd love to hear from both of you about what happened in your life and what caused you to be so passionate about this and brought you to this point.
Go ahead, Nancy.
So I have done peace work. I started out with an organization here called the Ulster Project that brings together teenagers from Northern Ireland and brings them to the United States for a month in the summertime, Catholic and Protestant teenagers, so that they can get to know each other as people and stop hating each other. And through that organization, I had a friend, and we ended up at a church vigil together for Trayvon Martin after he was shot and killed. And my friend said, "Do you care about gun violence?" And I said, "Well, of course I care about gun violence." And so she invited me to the Gun Violence Prevention Center, and that's how I got involved.
And you were the past president of the center.
I was past president.
How long did you serve in that capacity?
I served for 3 years in that capacity.
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
I'd love to hear also from you, Mike, about what got you on this path.
So I grew up in the Mennonite or Anabaptist kind of faith background, and this kind of vision is something that I feel called to do, that I really started thinking about while I was a youth and young adult pastor at a local church here in Colorado Springs. And really, it feels strange because I don't remember the moment that, like, oh yeah, this is going to be something that I want to commit a lot of my time to. But it was really just kind of this snowball effect, this kind of slow rolling at first, and then it's continued to pick up more and more speed and kind of volume with it, or momentum. And I think really it's just been prioritizing the stories of victims and survivors of gun violence. That one of the first events that Shane and I did was invite mothers to hit on the gun barrel after they shared their story about what happened to their sons. And one mother in particular took the hammer. And usually, if you're familiar with blacksmithing, you put the metal in the forge and it gets kind of bright glowing orange. And then when it cools off as you're working on it, you have to put it back in to continue working on it. But this one mother started to pound on the metal, and in between each pound she'd offer a word, and the one sentence was, "This is for my son," in between each and every hit. And she kept hitting and hitting and hitting until the metal was cooled down. But when I moved the metal to put it back into the forge, the hammer almost pulled her to the ground. And it offered such an image for everybody who was there, that this trauma she is still dealing with. And it had been almost 30 years since her son was accidentally shot in a random drive-by. It was actually a ricochet bullet that took his life. So realizing that from the very beginning really galvanized us to continue this path forward and develop what Guns to Garden Tools means in America today. So the Rawtools name is war backwards. That's I have to credit my wife for that. That if we're gonna make some sort of change, we got to kind of make that 180-degree turn, and exchange one tool for another tool. And gardening has offered so much creative, life-giving, not just actual like nutrition for our bodies, but also it's a life-giving practice. So we try and make handheld tools as much as we possibly can, so that it like gets you dirty a little bit. It makes you interact with the earth and really be intimately involved in the creation of something new.
So what do you want people to know? I mean, I know that reading your book would be an excellent way to get much deeper, and I'm sure there's a lot of resources from the center, but what are some initial things that you really want people to know about gun violence and perhaps some of the solutions that you're working towards? And I think hearing from both of you kind of on that topic as well, I think would be really great. Would you like to
go ahead, Nancy? We can go back and forth.
Well, I was going to pitch it back to Mike, actually, to talk about the nonviolence workshops that he's doing, because I think that's a very timely topic right now. And I think that is, with everything that's in the news, I think that is so important as an alternative to violence, is de-escalation and teaching people a different way.
Yeah, so we have something that we call Raw Power workshops that our current artist in residence, she runs it. Her art form is drama, but she's also been a peace activist for over 30 years. And what she does is she goes into different contexts and asks for kind of, if it's a church or more of a corporate atmosphere, she asks for the things that, or the times that people feel uncomfortable. And then she takes her gift of drama and does some role-playing pieces there's also some other educational aspects like a nonviolence 101. But the idea is that when we get to the point of talking about gun violence, there are so many lines or steps that had to happen before it got to gun violence. And if we can intervene, at the first or second step instead of waiting until someone's pointing a gun, then we can really heal a lot of conflict. And so we use those workshops as a way to invite people to imagine another opportunity. And so one of the kind of action items that we encourage people to do is something like a gun fast. So maybe you're not ready to donate a firearm to us, but maybe you can safely store it somewhere for 6 months and see how it affects your life. And maybe it kind of ignites different imaginative responses, especially if you own the gun for self-defense. Or if you're a hunter, maybe you realize you don't need it in your home all the time. As Nancy said, there's a lot of easy access to gun is a huge problem, especially when we get to places, and whether that's interpersonal or intrapersonal, especially with suicide, that if we have easy access to a gun and it's the worst day of our life and we just, we can't, we don't have the resources or aren't aware of them in that moment, often it just takes a little intervention or a phone call or a memory to be thought of again that really saves a life. There's a lot of little things in these raw power workshops try and get us to work that part of our imaginations a little more.
Yeah. In your work right now, I imagine a kind of an interesting question just because the topic of this, like we'd had this episode planned for a few weeks now, but of course we're also in the midst of this enormous uprising around Black Lives Matter and the death of George Floyd. And I wonder about some discussion points there, because when you talk about reducing gun violence, I mean, that's so important. But I imagine in your work at these workshops, is there a place for anger in this therapeutic process? And is there a difference between like therapeutic anger and the actions that we're seeing as people are fed up with the status quo? And is there a place for those kind of emotions, even if we're finding ways to stop gun violence? Is there also, like, I wonder if there's anything that's coming up for you as you're watching these things happening, anything you'd like to comment on as the social fabric is changing and shifting here?
Yeah, absolutely. We did an event with Reverend Sharon Risher, who lost her mother and two cousins and a friend in the Emmanuel 9 shooting and at the AME church. And when she took the hammer, the first time she did it, we've done a couple events with her now. She kind of, as she was she named everybody who was killed, and as she was about to take the hammer, she kind of let out this groan that you knew she just needed to get it out. And then she started hitting, and she afterwards she said it's the first time that she felt like she got out grief and anger in a healthy way. Um, and Walter Brueggemann, who's a Christian author who has really inspired a lot of our work, he has in his book, The Prophetic Imagination, talks about how if you don't give a space for anger to be brought to speech, then you invite violence to manifest itself in unhealthy ways. And so if you can exert things, I think that's also why there's this emergence of these like destruction rooms that you see. People need to physiologically get energy out that has been a part of their trauma, their grief or frustration or anxiety. And it can be little things like just having to work too much. You just need to go to a room and break something. Not that's like violent, but use that force and kind of divert it in a positive energy. And so we see that moment at the anvil as a real positive way to get energy out. And I think you're seeing that in protests. You're seeing that in riots where people are destroying property. That's a result of them not being able or not being listened to when they bring their pain to speech. And so I think that's a really big aspect of what it means to heal from grief and trauma, and what it looks like when we don't listen to people who have been crying out for hundreds of years of their grief and trauma.
Now you might know this about me, Nancy. I'm not sure if we kept you up to speed on this, Mike, but I'm actually currently in the running as Salt Lake County Mayor as a Green Party candidate. And of course, reducing gun violence is a major priority for so many. I wonder, Nancy, with your past experience and current board member experience on the center, what can be done politically or legislatively that's important right now, especially in the
Right.
Utah landscape?
Yeah. So there are lots of policies that we would like to see change here. Our gun laws are definitely, our poor gun laws are definitely contributing to gun violence in Utah. And our two biggest problems, as I mentioned, are suicide and domestic violence homicide. And there's a law called an extreme risk protective order, which allows family members and law enforcement to take guns away from people who present a danger to themselves or others. And it's temporary. The guns are temporarily taken away so that danger time can pass and that person has a time to cool off and get help. And we think this law would save a lot of lives in Utah, both lives that are lost to suicide and lives that are lost to domestic violence. In states like, I think Connecticut has had the law the longest, and for every 10 to 15 orders, a life is saved. And that's just huge. We lose over 400 people a year in Utah, just in Utah, to gun violence. And if you think about saving 40 of those lives, that's not a small number. So that's a bill that has come before the legislature the last 3 years. It has not passed yet, but we're going to keep bringing it back until it does pass because we would like to see those lives saved. We would also like to see universal background checks. We don't see any reason why if you can't pass a background check, you shouldn't be able to buy a gun. And a vast majority of gun owners and non-gun owners agree with us. So that was also brought before the legislature this year. It did not make it out of committee, but the people really want this law, and we think that just closing down those loopholes, making it so that people can't just go to a private seller at a gun show and get a gun when they know they can't pass a background check.
Did something happen earlier this year with the current county mayor trying to close those gun show loopholes, or was that?
She did.
Did that end up doing the job of this legislation, or was it just for this county and not for the state?
Just for the county.
Okay.
And we applaud her for that. That was a very smart move to say, well, this is a liability. We don't want guns sold to people that can't pass a background check, and so we're just going to require a background check within our county. We would like to see that happen all over the state. A lot of the deaths that occur and a lot of the illegal gun trade is in rural parts of Utah, and so if you can't pass a background check, you shouldn't be able to buy a gun. It's just that simple. We want people who can pass a background check. Then absolutely you should be able to, and it's very easy. It takes about 5 minutes to pass that background check, so it's not a hardship, and most gun owners get that.
Well, part of this podcast and live stream, the format is we welcome comments and questions. We wait till the end, but we want people to kind of be thinking about that might be watching the live stream right now to submit any questions or comments they might have for either Mike or Nancy here. Is there anything that perhaps you would want to add to that, Mike? Maybe more, I know you're not from Utah, but are there things happening with gun violence legislation, and where's the movement taking us? What is cutting edge? What's going on right now, and what should people know about gun violence and ways to help?
I think it's going to take a comprehensive effort of not just legislative pieces, but also community action. So here in Colorado Springs, where I'm at, in the state of Colorado, we did pass the Extreme Risk Protection Order bill that went into effect January of this year. And they're just now starting to try and compile data on that. So we won't know probably for 2 or 3 years to see the cumulative effect of that. But what also is happening is there's a Colorado safe storage firearm map where gun shops and police departments have said, look, we don't need to get to the ERPO stage. If you already feel that this is a threat, that we will store your gun for you until you feel like it's safe. So the only difference is you don't need to pass like you don't have to go back to a court to prove that you're capable of having a firearm in your home again. But it is a great way to kind of help bridge and offer this voluntary option before you have to take it to the courts or law enforcement to try and keep people safe in your community. So things like that. I'm also part of a firearm safety well, it's not a think tank anymore now. It's an action group that is primarily focused on suicide in Colorado, and El Paso County is our county here. And it's led by local medical professionals who have brought out evidence-based stats that are localized to our Colorado Springs and El Paso County context. And it's driven off models from other places where they found, like, for instance, in Oregon, there is a county that found that a lot of suicides happened in motels. And so they decided to fund a program that would help train a lot of um, desk clerks and employees at hotels and motels for mental health first aid, so that they could see different kind of signs of someone who's checking in and they live in the same town, kind of thing. They found out the different sign markers that show the risks, similar to you might be they're also trained to look for child trafficking. So looking at localized context and really galvanizing local resources, especially the medical community, can be a really valid and really valuable way to move forward with this. And like Connecticut, a lot of the hospitals realize it costs them so much money to to help folks who've been shot that they've funded gun buyback programs with their budget and saved money. They spend less money getting guns off the streets than they do repairing the harm that guns cause.
That's beautiful. I love that idea of training people in that mental health first aid. I think that's something that should come with everybody's just citizen literacy, resident literacy playbook, right? I mean, that's one of the things that they're kind of talking about right now, even on this kind of movement to reimagine what our police should be responsible for, right? Like so often, at least here in Utah, when there is a mental health crisis that's kind of beyond the scope of a family or friend, oftentimes it's the police that show up to try to de-escalate a situation with lights flashing and hands on guns and all of that. And I'm seeing some really promising things out of Oregon, and it sounds like there's some really progressive stuff happening in Colorado as well, and other places where we can actually have mental health first aid responders, mental health responders, instead of leaning on the police in that way. So, and you're right, localized context, that's definitely along the principles of permaculture. The more that we can ground in as communities and get to know what is going on for us and our communities and how do we make these issues better. I really appreciate bringing that up. That's some definite signs of hope there. Maybe same question to you, Nancy, here for Utah, since it's more localized. Are there things that people can do to get involved or support the center? And are there programs, like if someone wanted to turn in their gun in Utah, is there an avenue for that now, thanks to you guys? Tell us more about that.
So we just, we opened the Utah Disarming Station and are partnering with Rawtools. And so you can contact us at info@gbpc.org and just email us. And if you have a gun that you want to donate, and we will set it up so that we can dismantle that gun and get those pieces to Rawtools. And if you want a garden tool, we'll get that garden tool back to you. And if you want to donate it, we'll donate it to this very good cause. But yes, we would love to do that for people that have guns in their home and that don't need them anymore, or don't want them, or they're a liability. So we are getting that effort going. And as far as the Gun Violence Prevention Center of Utah, yes, we do. We have lots of people that help us volunteer. Normally we would be out this time of year at tabling events, educating. A lot of what we do is educate people about gun violence and about policies in other states that are making difference in other states that we would like to see brought to Utah. So again, info@gvpc.org. If you email us, we would be happy to connect with you and find out what your skills are and how you can best help us.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Is there any comments or questions out there on the live streams that would be good to go over? Check in with the live stream crew here.
One question, when is the next event?
When is the next event? I'm assuming like any of the workshops or gun turning in events. Yeah, please go ahead. Maybe Mike, you look like you had some knowledge of some things going on.
Oh, that's $1 million question. COVID has so much
Definitely changed a lot of things.
to
Yep.
do with that. We're really following CDC guidelines. We might do some local events here in Colorado as our local health officials approve larger and larger gatherings. But even then, it's going to be very different from what we used to do. So another event similar to what we did there in Salt Lake City, for us, we're not expecting until next summer sometime, but we are looking at new ways to involve folks. So we might even have like a gun to garden tool, blacksmith demonstration streaming through rawtools.org or our social media on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. So those are all things that we're looking at this winter and fall.
Beautiful. Thank you for your heart and your passion for this topic and the good work that you're doing. Is there a place you'd like to direct people if they're interested in getting your book or supporting Rawtools in other capacities?
Yeah, rawtools.org is our website. The book has its own website too, beatingguns.com. We're very thankful to our publisher, Brazos Press, for the wonderful work that they did in putting this book together. It's a full color book, so there's a lot of imagery in it that is very important to the story that we're doing. And really the book is focused on saying that this is you can easily get stuck in kind of it's a gun problem or a people or heart or soul problem. But we say there's a evidence of both in this, and that beating guns into garden tools is a unique way of engaging with the triggers in our streets and the triggers in our hearts.
That's beautiful. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation, Nancy, as we're finishing up?
I think we've covered it all.
Yeah, a lot of beautiful things discussed.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for bringing your heart-centered action to the show. And looks like we have another comment or question from the
there was a request
from the folks.
to see a closer view of the tool. If you want, when you want to bring it up to the camera here.
Yeah, you want to do that, Nancy? Mm-hmm. I would gladly wield one of those. I love Matics. They're so helpful.
We tend to say we go from semi-automatic to matic.
Very good.
Kind of make sure I'm bringing my wires with me.
And one thing I'd add is that don't underestimate kind of the cross-pollination
Switch angles
of
there, Sam. Oh, there you go.
Oh, okay.
of
Let me back up.
gun
There it is.
advocacy and gun violence
Okay.
prevention.
Say that again, Mike.
Don't downplay the cross-pollination of. I'm saying this to folks listening, of bringing different types of organizations like permaculture and gun violence prevention together, because it was the local permaculturists here in Colorado Springs who introduced us or kind of got the ball rolling for us to partner with the local police department, where we take their confiscated weapons and turn it into garden tools. But what we can't make into tools, we make into art that supports another organization in the community that those guns came from, that's working towards preventing gun violence at an intersection. So for here locally, it's to support restorative justice initiatives in Colorado Springs.
Beautiful. So permaculture was doing good things in Colorado as well as we do here in our communities. So thank you for mentioning that. And yeah, it's all, you know, if you're getting into this permaculture stuff, you know, it's everything is connected, and whatever work we can do to reduce gun violence and bring some real beautiful visions of the future and what we can do, it's so critical at this day and age to hold true to that vision, what you know is going to be good for future generations. I'm got my firstborn on the way right now, and it's definitely a very wild time in human history to be adding to the mix. And I just really always want to speak that truth that, we all came out of the womb knowing that to be in beautiful, vibrant places and gardens and forests is just, it's part of what it means to be human. It's so soul affirming. And I've noticed every time when you get people in the garden or on permaculture projects together, doesn't matter the background, doesn't matter, all those differences kind of dissolve as we find our peace in the healing of our world and our communities. So I definitely think these things connect, and I'm really grateful to have such beautiful, heart-centered guests on the show today. So thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks so much.
Nancy.
Yeah.